Hello and welcome to the Title Sports Network podcast. As yet untitled, Dan. We haven't officially started a name for this, but we're back here. It's Wednesday, midweek podcast with myself, Seb Parkinson, and Dan Rafael. The best thing that's happened to me today, Dan, is I was in my local Morrison's store and I bought a pack of ham, which said 3 slices of ham, and there was 5 in it. So I'm a very happy boy today. Right, let's jump in.
You gotta go play the lottery, man.
yeah. Well, look, I'm very happy, and I took a picture of it, put it on my Instagram. So that was the highlight of my day, my week so far. But look, last weekend there was sort of 3 or 4 events on. It was a pretty busy weekend, to be fair. Generally speaking, we would start on the Shakur Stevenson or the Babic Fischer card, but I know that you really enjoyed the card from Japan. And that was Martinez versus Ioka. So just run us through that and the best bits from it.
Oh, I mean, it was just a fantastic fight. I mean, honestly, it's a fight of the year contender. I mean, in a year where there hasn't been a fight that's just so overwhelming. I mean, I guess a lot of people might say Tyson Fury against Alexander Usyk, which is a worthy candidate. But this was, in terms of just pure unbridled violence and action, this was a sensational fight. Now, the scoring doesn't necessarily reflect that because one judge had the audacity to have it a shutout in favor of Fernando Martinez. But this was a competitive fight, just a tremendous battle. And there was high stakes. It's not just some random fight. They were fighting to unify. Martinez was the IBF champion at junior bantamweight. Ioka was a 4-division champion, probably, a really good chance to be a Hall of Famer. He held the WBA title in that weight class, and they met to unify those belts, and they put on an absolutely blazing fight. Round 7 is like a round of the year type round. And they just battled it out, But Martinez was a little bit younger, a little bit fresher, just so aggressive that he kind of got out to a big lead, and it was very, Ioka just could not catch up to him, even though he had a lot of moments and did very well on the back half of the fight. But they put on a great action fight. The judges got it right, even if one of the scores was completely ridiculous. And the thing about it, besides Martinez unifying these titles, which is big, in itself in terms of the sport. But if you go back to the previous week, you had Juan Francisco Estrada, who, when he defeated and knocked out, or when Bam Rodriguez defeated and knocked out Juan Francisco Estrada to win the WBC and the lineal title, the first thing he said, and he had said it before the fight, is that the next guy he wanted was the winner of Martinez and Ioka to further unify the belts. So that puts Martinez now in probably a pretty good position to land that fight. Now, it might not be next because of the fact that Estrada still has the right to the rematch, which he said he will exercise that option. We have to see if he actually goes through the legal process and does so. I suspect that he will, and that probably will be a fall fight. But that does not mean that come the early part of next year, Fernando Martinez and Bam Rodriguez would make a pretty big fight to unify 3 belts, a fight that I think can absolutely be made promotionally. It would probably bring a really good purse for Martinez, so he would probably be interested to do it because Bam is the more of the star power kind of guy. Anyway, so that fight between Martinez and Ioka was spectacular, and it could lead to something much greater.
Yeah, and a lot of people were sort of a bit upset that they couldn't really watch that. I believe that there wasn't a broadcaster in America for that, was there?
Yeah, unfortunately. I mean, there was no broadcaster in the UK, to my knowledge. In the United States, there was no broadcaster. It was shown in Mexico on ESPN Knockout, so some people with satellite dishes and access can kind of find that. But the good thing about the technology world we live in, we don't have to go back to even the early 2000s when I used to, trade VHS cassettes, with people from different parts of the world and get those fights, 6 weeks later. But you can just go on YouTube and watch the fight. There must be, 50 people that posted the fight, and it's just a great fight.
Yeah, well, you mentioned about a bit of a controversial scorecard there, Dan. I want to bring us on to the Oshak Foster fight and the controversy around that. Now, I've seen it all over your Twitter. I've seen it all over pretty much everybody's Twitter, to be fair. For people that don't know, Dan, what happened in that fight and why was there so much controversy?
Well, what happened in the fight is you had Oshaki Foster defending the WBC's junior lightweight title against Robson Conceição, who was an excellent fighter, who was a 3-time Olympian, a Olympic gold medalist for Brazil. And, Foster, who had been, this was his 3rd title defense. So it's a really solid matchup. Now, Conceição had, coming into this fight, was 0-2-1 in world title fights. He had been beaten, controversially by Oscar Valdez in a fight. We don't have to litigate it, but Oscar was allowed to fight despite the controversy over a failed drug test that where you had the commission with one set of rules and the drug testing organization with a different set of rules. In any event, he lost that fight. He lost the fight to Shakur Stevenson for the unified title. Also a fight that was somewhat controversial from the standpoint, not the scoring, but Stevenson got stripped because he didn't make the weight for that fight. And then in this past fall, he has a absolutely sensational draw in a slugfest against Emmanuel Navarrete. So here he is with, like, you got to figure at 35, it's his last shot for the title. And if you watch the match, O'Shaquie Foster, a younger guy, fresher guy, just seemed like he toyed with him defensively and offensively. Not that it was not a scintillating kind of fight, but you had a Conceição who's, in my opinion, I think if you asked anybody that watched it that thought that he lost it widely, aggressive but ineffective aggressiveness, wasn't landing any punches. And you have O'Shaquie Foster, who was basically making him miss everything and landing enough and certainly outlanding him in basically every single round. And by the time the fight was over, you're like, this fight's probably like 10 rounds to 2. Maybe it's 9 rounds to 3. Maybe it's 11 rounds to 1. Mark Kriegel on ESPN, my old colleague, my boy, who does their unofficial scoring, had it 11 rounds to 1. The other commentators had it the same way. I thought it was 10 rounds to 2. And as you said, if you go on social, see anywhere you want, I couldn't find anybody that actually thought that you had a winner in Robson Conceição. And then they announced the decision, and it's a split decision, and he ends up winning the fight. So to me, it was a complete miscarriage of justice that, and I don't use this lightly because I know there's variances in the way people see fights. That to me is just an outright robbery. Now, I spoke to a couple of people that work for Top Rank who promote both fighters. So they didn't really have like a vest. They were going to have the winner or the loser. So they were going to, have it their way regardless of the outcome, who thought that Conceição, because of the aggressiveness, was actually the guy that won a close fight. So, I respect their opinions, but we just have a difference of opinion in this one. They're the only ones I can find that thought that might be the case, other than 2 of the judges that gave it to Conceição. So, we're unlikely to see an immediate rematch, it seems, because it wasn't a particularly good fight. Top Rank, I don't think, has the appetite to make that fight. And there was no rematch clause in his contract for for O'Shaquie, because it was not a mandatory fight, but they still didn't have any kind of rematch rights. So maybe he'll get an opportunity to fight for one of the other belts, and Conceição will go and do something else. But it was just unfortunate because you hate to see a guy that has worked that hard for the title, where if you are a big, huge name, if you are Anthony Joshua, if you were back years ago, if you're Floyd Mayweather or Manny Pacquiao or whoever, and maybe you had lost a fight. Obviously, Floyd never did, but your livelihood is not really that impacted because you're still going to make tens of millions of dollars in your next fight. When Anthony Joshua lost, it didn't really impact his ability to earn money, and he's lost 3 times. He's still making tens of millions of dollars. But a guy like O'Shaquie Foster, the belt is why he can make real money, and without that, he goes from making one level to making another level. And so I felt like, unfortunately, he loses the title and significant economic things in his career because of it. So it's really, really unfortunate.
Do you think that with the controversy then, I just sort of look back at the Josh Taylor, Jack Catterall one, where one of the judges was basically demoted off the back of the scorecard. Do you think that in this fight, in this instance, that could be a repercussion, or is that not going to happen?
I mean, you'd like to think so, but it's highly unlikely, because we've seen plenty of times where there's been pretty poor scorecards in various fights of different levels, either the biggest fights in the world or like this. This is not the biggest fight in the world, just another, good, solid matchup in terms of a world title fight. But very, very rarely are the repercussions. And a matter of fact, as we tape this, or maybe it was either yesterday or today or tomorrow or whatever, but this week anyway, is one of the most controversial fights I ever covered. You got to go back a number of years ago, probably 10 or 12 years ago. You had a fight in Atlantic City, New Jersey, where you had a junior middleweight bout between Paul Williams, who was a top pound-for-pound guy for years, who had won welterweight title twice, against Arislandi Lara, who at the time was an undefeated up-and-coming fighter, went on, of course, to be a dominating junior middleweight champion, now actually holds the WBA middleweight belt. Anyway, they fought a fight in Atlantic City on the tail end of Paul's career, and I was there ringside. Everybody, I mean, you couldn't find anybody in the crowd, fan or otherwise, media, even the promoters, that thought that it wasn't Arislandi Lara that not only won the fight, but won easily. And they gave it to Paul Williams on a majority decision. And in the end, this is something that I have not really seen before or after. The New Jersey regulators suspended all 3 judges indefinitely, including the judge that scored a draw. But that does not happen very often. And in the case of this fight with Foster against Conceição, to me, I mean, putting suspension or firing aside for a second, I'd like to be able to have a situation where you have this type of scenario unfold where they are made available to the media, at least a pool reporter, to ask some questions like, hey, what'd you see? Like, why did you score it that way? It didn't seem like Conceição was landing any punches. Can you explain yourself? At least give them a forum to at least make their opinion known. But they hide the judges away, and it's very rare that you can ever get a word with them. And the commissions protect their guys and gals. They don't ever really speak much about it. And that's a problem. There's no transparency.
Yeah, actually, just on that, I do remember one of the controversial fights. Boxing News' Rob Tebbert actually was stood next to one of the judges and just stuck the camera on him and just asked him a question. And it's very, very rare you get to see that happen. And I'm sure you probably got a bit of grief from boxing officials for doing that. But look, right place, right time, and that's journalism. But Dan, just moving on. So Shakur Stevenson made a return at his home in Newark over the weekend. A lot of people have been criticizing him for being a boring fight. From your perspective, from boxing purist perspective, boxing journalist perspective, did he do enough to just win? Was the boringness on both guys, or is that just what people can expect now from Shakur Stevenson?
Shakur Stevenson, I guess you would say he's an acquired taste. He's super talented, prodigious talent, Olympic medalist, undefeated as a professional, world champion in 3 weight classes, unified titles in the junior lightweight division. He's just a true talent. He's got pound for pound skills. He's a phenomenal fighter. I have zero negativity to say about Shakur Stevenson in that respect. Now, does he thrill the fans? No, he doesn't. Let's just be honest about it. I mean, he doesn't do that. But there have been plenty of fighters that achieve greatness and that are highly regarded on pound for pound lists, make the Hall of Fame, do all that, who are sort of in that same category. So the most extreme example, I guess, would be Floyd Mayweather, who became the top fighter in boxing for many, many years, made more money than anybody, had the biggest fights, finished his career 50-0, won titles in numerous weight classes, and never was a guy that thrilled the crowd. I think that Shakur Stevenson, he promises a lot in terms of what he's going to do, but he doesn't score knockouts. Now, I don't personally hold that against him. To me, to be a successful fighter or to be a guy that I want to watch, you don't necessarily have to score knockouts. But you win and you do so pretty easily. So he won the fight against Artem Harutyunyan almost, very, very easily. I mean, it was a shutout. You could have had the fight, maybe not a complete 12-0, but certainly 11-1, 10-2, those types of scores. What I like about Shakur Stevenson's style is that unlike certain guys that I have been highly critical of in the past, who are very talented and always were winning handily, but they would run. They wouldn't do anything to try to step on the gas or try to get a guy out or to do anything to exert themselves offensively. In the case of Shakur Stevenson, what I like about him, and it's one of the reasons I always liked and respected Pernell Whitaker and Winky Wright, who are also noted defensive fighters but had great records and are in the Hall of Fame, they didn't run. Those guys stood in the pocket and made their opponent miss and drove them crazy with head movement and shoulder movement and frustrated them beyond belief. So if you watch the Shakur fight against Artem, he stood in the pocket and he made a miss. The only thing that he can't do, which is similar to what Pernell Whitaker and Winky Wright, is that he can't so-called make them miss and make them pay. Because when he lands, he doesn't really do much damage. So some people take offense to that. Now, is it the most thrilling thing in the world to watch for most people? No, it really isn't. And there's a reason why they showed a camera shot on the broadcast of literally after round 11 and this is in his hometown, so presumably these are his fans. They're leaving the arena before the fight's over. Like, they couldn't hang out for another 5 minutes to hear the scores. I mean, so that's kind of embarrassing if you ask me. But for my taste, I actually like watching Shakur fight. I find his style, again, it's not, keep in mind, I'm the biggest Arturo Gatti fan in the world, who was in war after war after war. So I love myself a good tear-up. But I'm also perfectly fine with a guy that's at that kind of talent. It wasn't like he wasn't trying to knock the guy out. He was going after him. He landed a lot of punches. And sometimes, guys just not going anywhere. He had Cartoonian cut up under his eyes and, clearly was showing the effects of it. Meanwhile, Shakur looked like he was out, for a jog in the park. So, everybody has to make their own opinion. Now, where it comes to the point of his next situation, what he's going to do, as you know, this was the last fight of his contract with Top Rank, so he becomes a free agent. So now you have to ask yourself, if you're the promoter, any promoter, do you want to sign a fighter that's going to command a certain amount of money and not thrill the crowd and not sell out a building and not be a guy that, because of that style, at least not yet, I'm not saying never, is not going to necessarily attract a huge crowd for a pay-per-view, for example. And you have to keep in mind also, Seb, a lot of guys just don't want to fight Shakur Stevenson because they don't want to be toyed with, embarrassed, and played with. And so that's the quandary. Top Rank offered him a five-fight contract extension worth $15 million. That's minimum, by the way. So if you're fighting Artem Harutyunyan, you're making $3 million. But if you're stepping up against another top-level fighter, if you're fighting Tank Davis, if you're fighting Lomachenko, if you're fighting William Zepeda, guys like that, that's going to probably give you more than the $3 million. So that was just the floor, and he turned that down. So now he goes out into the marketplace. Is there another promoter out there that's going to be willing to offer Shakur Stevenson that kind of money or more and have a certain level of opponent that he can fight? I say good luck to him.
Potentially a Riyadh season fighter then, if that's the case.
Well, I'll say this. If you take a look at the types of fighters that Riyadh season puts on, and those fighters that get on those shows are really at the pleasure of Turki Al-Sheikh. If you've looked at the types of fights that they've made, it strikes me, and any background about the types of fighters that Turki Al-Sheikh likes and are his favorite fighters, he likes guys that make top action fights. His favorite fighter, for example, is Roberto Duran. So I'm not sure that Shakur Stevenson fits into the mold of the type of guy that Turki Al-Sheikh's going to want to go and spend a lot of money on for a Riyadh seasons card. We'll have to wait and see. I mean, I don't know. And also the opponents have to be part of that also. So Shakur wants to fight Lomachenko. He wore a T-shirt basically saying that Bob Arum was keeping him away from him. He wants to fight Tank Davis. He wants to fight these bigger names. But Gervonta Davis and Lomachenko are probably headed towards a fight against each other this fall, which is going to take both of them out of the running for a fight against Shakur. So maybe the place he winds up potentially, or at least on a short-term deal, might be a Golden Boy, which could offer him William Zepeda, who's number 1 in all of the organization's lightweight rankings. I guess we'll talk a little bit about his fight he won this weekend. And that's sort of what there is. There's not a ton out there for him in terms of available top-name opponents who probably really aren't that interested to fight him right off the bat anyway.
I guess him having that WBC belt really sort of gives him a bit of strength, because at least he'll have mandatories and he'll have guaranteed purses for fighting for that belt unless he rescinds it. But William Zepeda is a name that has been touted to be potentially next for Shakur Stevenson. Is that a likely destination for him?
I mean, I can't say it's likely. I mean, Oscar De La Hoya from Golden Boy, who was William Zepeda's promoter, has been posting things on social media saying, come on, Shakur, that'd be a great fight. And, it is a very intriguing style of if you put them together, because as we talked about, Shakur is the ultimate slick fighter, defensive-minded, fast feet, fast hands, huge, intelligence in the ring, great amateur pedigree, make you miss all day long, may not be able to make you pay with hard punches, but still lands at a pretty decent rate. And so that's that kind of style. And he's a southpaw. And then you take William Zepeda, who's also a southpaw, by the way, but he's got one gear. That's come straight forward and try to blast your head off or blast your body apart. And that's, I've always said in terms of Zepeda, his offense is his defense, because he's so active and so aggressive that he doesn't give the opponent a chance to breathe, to get their own offense off. So that serves him to keep the other guy away from him while he's beating the shit out of them. And he did that again this weekend, on Saturday, pretty much on the same timeline as when Shakur was doing his fight. He was in California in the main event of the Golden Boy show on DAZN, and he completely annihilated Giovanni Cabrera. And it was a typical William Zepeda fight. Start a little slow in the first round, lost the first round actually on all 3 scorecards, come back, start to get in the groove, wins the second round on the scorecards, and he's starting to build up a head of steam, and eventually he becomes like that train going down the mountain without the brakes, and you get to the third round, and Cabrera is feeling good about himself. He's in the fight. It's close. They're going a little back and forth, and then suddenly he explodes with just a tremendous amount of body punches, and he absolutely crumples Cabrera to the canvas, and it's all over and out. I mean, Zepeda is just a destroyer. And again, it's a rare thing, Seb, to be ranked number 1 by all 4 organizations in the top spot. So he's going to be the mandatory in multiple organizations. So he's going to, and I'm not sure what the order of who's next and how that goes. That may play a part of their game plan of where they want to go. But the point is, he's going to have options because of that lofty status. So there's no reason why he shouldn't be in a world title fight, probably in his next fight. Now, if you take into account that Loma as the IBF champion and Tank as the WBA champion because of the fact that they're probably going to have a unification fight means I don't think either guy necessarily has a mandatory that's due, but the organizations probably would allow that unification to take place ahead of any kind of mandatory. The WBO champion is Baranchyk, who just won that title back, a few weeks ago. I guess that's a conceivable fight, but the fight that would probably make the most sense for the fans anyway, in terms of the purses that would be available to both guys that are out there, it would seem that maybe Zepeda would be that guy. I don't know what Zepeda, I know he wants a world championship fight. That's a hard, tough fight for him against a style fighter like Shakur, but Shakur has never faced that kind of pressure, in my opinion. And that would be kind of very interesting to see how he can take that just ungodly pressure that he applies. So I would like to see that fight, given the fact that Tank and Loma probably aren't available to him next.
The great thing is as well, Shakur Stevenson is known for going 10 or 12 rounds. And Zepeda is known for going 3 rounds, 4 rounds. Apart from in 2022 when he had 2 fights that went the distance, his record is, 2 out of 10, 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10, retired, knockout. Putting them two together, it's going to go one of 2 ways.
Yeah.
And I don't see Shakur Stevenson getting a knockout in that fight. So he would have to outbox him tactically to take him to full 12. And does Zepeda have the discipline and the energy to maintain that level? Or will he go out there and try and steamroll Shakur Stevenson and get his first loss in his record?
It is a fascinating fight. And when I think about the matchup, one of the things that pops into my mind is when you find a fight that is the complete opposite of each other in terms of their styles. As we said, one guy just straight banger, brawler, knock your head off, big, huge power, decent boxing skills, but not his forte. And then the fighter like Shakur with the incredible skills and not a lot of punching power. So I keep thinking about Diego Corrales against Floyd Mayweather. Now I'm going back, and 20 years ago, I covered that fight at ringside, and I was the guy picking Corrales, as were many, because he was been on this massive knockout streak, and Floyd, was a guy that with great boxing skills, but you kind of figured maybe Corrales might, get a hold of him at some point in 12 rounds. So to me, this is a similar kind of style matchup. As we know, what happened in that fight was Floyd Mayweather scored 5 knockdowns and knocked out Corrales. In other words, the one scenario that was very hard to conceive of ahead of the fight happened. Like, you could have conceived of Corrales knocking Mayweather out. You could conceive of Floyd Mayweather kind of easily outboxing the guy. And those are sort of the 2 scenarios that we're sitting here talking about the possibility when it comes to a Shakur Zepeda fight. And what happened? Floyd knocked him down 5 times and stopped him. So you never know.
Towel in, didn't they? Yeah. I'm going to move on to Jacobs Mosley, but first, you've got 36 seconds to tell me about Babic and Fischer. Go.
I don't even think I need 36 seconds. 8-punch combination with a guy that was much bigger in what I felt like it was pretty much a mismatch going in. And I said on my betting show on Friday that this has a real distinct possibility of a first-round knockout, and I don't care what the under is. I'm taking the under, and it cashed big time. Babic, no chin, and Johnny Fischer, a very improving heavyweight who is exciting to watch with great power and a great fan base. That I make my time.
Boom. That was about 25 seconds. So, yeah. So got another 4 seconds, and Babic has just been knocked out. No, going into that fight, like we talked about it last week, I was really excited for that fight just because of the expectation that it wasn't going to last more than a few rounds. It was played after it was fought after the England game for the Americans watching. England are participating in Euro 2024, which is like the Copa America that I think America are participating in right now. England are through to the semi-final after probably the worst football match I've ever seen, which was only bettered by the previous game and the previous game and the previous game. England have been absolutely disgraceful. So have a lot of the teams in the tournament, to be fair. France haven't scored an open play goal, and they're in the semi-finals against Spain.
They weren't as bad as Babic.
No, well, that's it. And the fact that people had to endure 120 minutes and a penalty shootout of the England game, to get that over in 36 seconds was probably a bit of a sigh of relief, because if that going any more than a few rounds, people would have started being yawning, because England could have put everybody to sleep. So, yeah, good fight. Eddie Hearn sort of suggesting that Johnny Fischer can be world-class. He's a world-class prospect. The way I'm looking at it is that it feels like Eddie Hearn's trying to promote Fischer to be like the next Anthony Joshua. Forgive me for making that suggestion if it's completely kibosh, but it feels as though he's really putting weight behind this guy being the future of the heavyweight division. He's 25 years of age. Eddie Hearn says he can go and beat Fabio Wardley and Fraser Clark. Mark Tibbs, his trainer, says that them two are never going to get any better, so Fisher's going to go through there. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, number one, that's Eddie doing his job. He's supposed to say stuff like that. I mean, he's a promoter. The idea is to, shout it from the rooftops and get everybody to pay attention, whether they believe you or they don't, but they're going to be interested and they're going to want to watch Johnny Fisher fight. And the thing in terms of the promotion is Eddie has the perfect guy to promote, because what's more exciting than a big punching heavyweight that seems fearless to fight whoever that they put in front of him, and it goes in there with one idea, and that is to knock you out. So he's super exciting. I liked watching Johnny Fisher. I've said before, when he was 1, 2, 3-0, and he was fighting on these DAZN, before the bell preliminaries, I was watching those fights, and he was knocking everybody out, and exciting in doing so. I think he's gotten better now. To me, there's a big jump between you're improving and maybe you can become something. Maybe you even can become a guy that can contend with a top 10 type fighter, maybe even, get into some bigger fights. But to make the leap that at this stage of his career that he can be the next Anthony Joshua, I mean, I got a hard time with that. I'm not saying he can't. And I if he can, that's great. Remember, Anthony Joshua was a top level amateur Olympic gold medalist with the expectation that as a professional, he would become a world champion, which he has done so, and become one of the top heavyweights in boxing. I don't know if Johnny's got that kind of upside, but what Johnny does have the possibility of doing, besides improving and maybe getting to a higher level than he's at, European level, maybe the world level. But along the way, he's going to make a lot of money and bring in a lot of fans and sell a lot of tickets and make a lot of, fun, exciting fights. And there's nothing wrong with that either. So, maybe Eddie's overstating it a little bit in terms of the potential. But, if Johnny's willing to put the work in, and he seems like he's pretty dedicated based on everything I've heard and read and seen, why not? I'm not going to say he's got no chance. I mean, heavyweights, it's about, you can change things in one punch. We've seen that happen plenty of times. So I think I heard Eddie say in the interview, whatever the end result is of what Johnny accomplishes, the journey is going to be a lot of fun to go on, because he's going to make bigger fights and more exciting fights. I think I heard them mention about the possibility of a fight against Dave Allen, which seems about the perfect level of, taking that next step up to a guy that is got some accomplishment, that got a fan base, but not at the Joshua level, obviously, or a top 10 contender type level. So let's see how it plays out. I just hope that he stays injury-free, they keep him busy, and he keeps putting on exciting fights, 36 seconds or longer, whatever the case may be.
I mean, I want to come in there because I don't like the Dave Allen fight. I think they like the Dave Allen fight because they know what Johnny Fisher would do to Dave Allen. Dave Allen in 2019 was at the peak, and I think he went in there with David Price, and it was Dave Allen and David Price. This is a really good matchup, and David Price just absolutely humiliated him. And then obviously he's had his mental health struggles, and then he tried to make a comeback on the small hall shows on Fight Zone. I think Dave Allen probably needs to call it a day now. Personally, that's just my opinion. No,
I understand that, but again, it doesn't have to necessarily be Dave Allen, but somebody of that level, somebody that's got name recognition among the British fans, who's not a completely washed up old shot guy, which Dave is not that, even if he's maybe not what he was at his best, and take it to that level as you take a step up, incremental steps up. Now, I don't think that he's ready for a guy like Fabio Wardley or Fraser Clark just yet. But I think, if he continues to do what he's been doing, over the next, few fights, he will be.
Yeah, no, I agree. I saw the Dave Allen name and I saw a lot of people talking it up, and I just think that's not the right fight. Unless Dave Allen is willing to take a loss for that fight, because I don't think he stands any chance whatsoever. I think that'll be another one rounder, to be perfectly honest.
The one thing that we just don't know about Fisher just yet, I mean, we know about his excitement that he brings. We know about the punching power he has shown against that level of opponent, about, his apparent dedication, the fan reaction that he has. One thing you never know about, and it's not just about Johnny Fisher, it's any heavyweight. We have no idea what happens when somebody punches back and he gets hit on the chin. Yeah. And that's always the difference maker. If you prove that you can take a decent shot, we'll find out a lot more about you as a fighter.
No, definitely. Right, Dan, let's move on to Jacobs versus Mosley. Now, this was a bit of a strange one, because Mosley could have gone in there for a title fight, but he took the Daniel Jacobs fight. Daniel Jacobs, who hasn't fought since he got beat by John Ryder in London at I think it was at Ali Pali, back in February 2022, if memory serves correct.
That's 2.5 years ago.
Yeah. So he explained it that Jacobs is a veteran, a legend, and he wants to share the ring with him, but he did that in favor of a world title shot. Can you just explain that thinking to me?
So
that doesn't make sense.
Yeah, their point of view was this, that he apparently had some kind of offer to fight Carlos Adames for the WBC middleweight title. And it was again, this is what they're saying, that his opinion was, of course he'd like a world title shot, but he wanted the bigger name on the record to put him in a bigger position. And Daniel Jacobs, even as a former two-time world title holder who hadn't fought for 2.5 years in the heavier weight class now, he had moved up, Danny, to super middleweight. And Mosley has fought both in super middleweight and at middleweight and has actually been able to go back and forth. Again, it was their opinion that it would be better for the long term for me to go in there and take on a guy like Jacobs, beat him, and then put myself in even a better position for a world title fight. And so that's what happened. And so Daniel Jacobs coming off the long layoff. Now, the fight you mentioned against John Ryder, he lost. I think it was a split decision or maybe a majority decision. I thought Danny Jacobs won that fight. A lot of people did. It was very close. No knock on John Ryder, but that wasn't like he wiped him out or anything. That was, the kind of fight where, there was controversy. But, he didn't fight for the next 2.5 years. He mentioned afterwards he had a motorcycle accident that kind of kept him out of the loop for a while in terms of, recovering from that. In any event, he did make the decision. He wanted to give it another go. And he came into this fight. And I was hugely disappointed. I followed Danny Jacobs, covered him his entire career way back in the day. I had him when I was working at ESPN as, I forget, might have even been when I was at USA Today, for all I remember, as the prospect of the year one year. Just a really outstanding amateur, and came into the pros and accomplished a lot, and maybe didn't win the biggest fights, but had huge fights against Triple G, huge fight against Canelo Alvarez, fought, plenty of good fighters, beat Chavez Jr., had, beat Sergio Mora twice, had a great knockout in the first round against, in an all New York rivalry Brooklyn fight. That was a big deal at the time when he knocked out Peter Quillen. So this is not a fighter that lacks for accomplishment. And his story was so remarkable that as a young fighter, he was, diagnosed with a very rare form of bone cancer, was literally on his deathbed, so they thought, overcame the cancer, not only lived, he actually came back to boxing. And not only did he come back to boxing, but it was after his cancer diagnosis, he went on to win 2 middleweight world titles. So that's like a big deal. So from the point of view of Mosley, that was more meaningful in terms of the name to get on your record, even if you had the chance maybe to fight Adames, which frankly would probably be a tougher fight anyway, based on what we saw of what Danny Jacobs had left. So Danny came into the fight. He missed weight by a pound plus, 1.2 pounds. Looked not, he was real soft around the middle in that fight. And as a person soft around the middle, I know what I'm talking about. He just didn't look like he had much that night. He didn't seem to, the quickness wasn't there. Now, according to what Mosley said afterwards, he still carried punching power. They still hit hard because Danny was always a really outstanding puncher. But in the end, Mosley, much younger, much fresher, just toyed with him. I mean, won easily, like 10 rounds to nothing, 9 rounds to 1. I mean, it wasn't really a fight. And Danny, and I'm glad to see this, he didn't do it in the ring after the fight or at a press conference. He took the day, I guess, even if it wasn't a long period of time. And then on Sunday, later in the day on Sunday, he posted to his Facebook page and then he gave like a account of what had occurred and said, basically, you know what, I'm satisfied with my career. My son is proud of me. I made a lot of money, had a great career. No one's going to forget my inspiring story. I beat cancer and won 2 middleweight world titles, and he announced his retirement. So I'm glad to see Danny gets out with his faculties. Gets out. We made a lot of money. I mean, his manager, Keith Connolly, negotiated some deals for him that every fighter should be so lucky to get. He had a big HBO contract. Then he got the big fights that were on pay-per-view, and he made a huge amount of money in his career. And I wish Danny Jacobs nothing but the best. And as far as Mosley, admittedly, when he started, he's the one that said he was not very good when he turned pro. Now he's become, I don't know if he's going to be on the pound-for-pound list necessarily, but he's certainly a lot better than what we saw in the early days. He has made improvements. He has put in the hard work, and now he's got a big name on his record. And I suspect he's still going to be in position to get a title fight against Carlos Adames or somebody else.
Yeah, well, finish off this part. It's been a long part, but very, very enjoyable. The second part is going to be much shorter than this. Just to finish off then, Dan, we saw the 2 former UFC fighters, Nate Diaz and Jorge Masvidal, get in the boxing ring it was a win for Nate Diaz. Your Twitter suggests it was a very entertaining fight. I haven't actually got around to watching it yet because it was very early in the morning here, and I just haven't had a chance to catch up on it. I've seen a few highlights. It looked like a really good scrap, but do you think we'll see more of these former UFC guys getting in the boxing ring?
I actually wouldn't be shocked if we saw part 3 of Diaz and Masvidal in the boxing ring, depending on how the pay-per-view did. But it was a very entertaining fight. Now, I had said it was the best fight I saw on the weekend, but that was before I saw Martinez versus Ioka, which I was not able to watch live. But in terms of the Saturday action, terrific fight. I mean, it just goes to show you that they may not be well-schooled boxers. Obviously, they've got great experience in terms of their combat background from UFC, but even at a limited amount of boxing, they still put on a hell of a show. It was competitive. Diaz, we won. It was a fair scores the way that it was close, but he definitely won the fight. But they had a huge crowd there, so the electricity coming through the TV was really outstanding. They had over 18,000 in the arena down there in Southern California, and they put on a hell of a show. I mean, I'm not a UFC guy, so I never watched when they fought in the UFC, but I certainly know what happened, that they had fought at a main event of one of their UFC pay-per-views in New York City back in 2019, and it was Masvidal that won, but not on a like a submission or a knockout. He basically won because Diaz got some cuts, and the doctor ended up recommending to stop the fight. So they did this boxing rematch, and it was a lot of fun. It was exciting, and they put on a card around it that was interesting for different reasons. The Jacobs and Mosley fight for one, and if they do it again in a boxing match, I wouldn't be shocked. Although Nate Diaz was calling for a rematch against Jake Paul, who beat him by a decision, in his only other boxing match he's had. So now he's 1-1, and Masvidal actually is 1-1 too, because he had one pro fight going back, like 15 years ago or whatever it was. So yeah, I mean, if you have these UFC fighters that have certain popularity and they decide they want to go into boxing, at least they're matched evenly. They have a history from the cage, and the fans turned out. I suspect that the vast majority of the people that turned out for that fight and those that purchased the fight were probably more UFC fans than boxing fans. But, they made good business, it seems.
Yeah, because there's a lot of talk that a lot of boxers get told, come and fight in the cage, come and fight in the cage. Tyson Fury's one that says he will, but it feels like it's actually going the other way. There's probably more money in it, I guess, for UFC
that's
guys.
That's why the UFC guys turn to boxing, because for one night they can make usually more money in a boxing match than they can when they're doing UFC fights. Particularly if you're Diaz and you're Masvidal and your UFC time is sort of played out, turning to boxing. They were able to find some success in that event, and you don't, it's not unprecedented, but very rarely do you see the top boxers go into the cage. Now, there are some active fighters, like take, for example, Savannah Marshall, Claressa Shields, who obviously have made their names as top boxers, who are now also competing in the PFL. But that's not, in my opinion, what they're doing. That's not just sort of like, let's go get a big fight and make some money. They're actually trying to pursue a career in MMA along with their boxing careers. But it's more rare that you see a boxer who's maybe, done or at the end of their careers that just wants to go there for like a one-off payday. It just hasn't really happened. For the most part, it's the MMA fighter that comes to the boxing ring.
Excellent stuff, Dan. Right, well, that'll be the end of part one. In part two, or in the second half of the show, we're going to talk about the situation with Ryan Garcia. So don't go anywhere. I'll be back in 2 secs. Welcome back to Title Sports Network. My name is Seb Parkinson. I'm joined by Dan Rafael. Dan, look, bit of a difficult subject to talk about. Two white men and talking about this. Ryan Garcia took to social media last week, and very, very, difficult conversation he was having. I don't know whether he was drunk or whether he was just, I don't know what was going on, but he made some horrendous statements. Your side of the pond, you're over in America. I know he's come out and apologized now, but these apologies don't really hold any weight with the sort of things he was saying. What's going on?
I'm not in his head. I'm not part of his group of inner circle or whatever. But you mentioned that he made an apology, and if you take a look at the apology, it was as half-assed an apology as you can find. A lot of it was very passive-aggressive. I'm sorry to those who I offended. I mean, it was not a full-throated sort of, apology, in my opinion. I mean, the things he said are just reprehensible. I'm not like pearl clutching. I don't approve of that kind of language, period. It drives me crazy when I see that type of thing employed, whether you're a black fighter or a white fighter. I don't think it has a place in our sport or society. I mean, you want to call me a prude or I'm on my soapbox, I don't give a shit. The point is, you can't say the kinds of things that Ryan Garcia said. F, N-word, F Muslims, whatever. You can't say that you can say it. It's your free country, but there's going to be repercussions. You're going to face pushback. You're going to face blowback. And then when you take it to the next level and you talk about we should dig up the body of George Floyd, and for those who might not know, the black man murdered by police in Minneapolis on a street corner for no real reason whatsoever, who wasn't involved in any kind of violence. What he passed a counterfeit bill shouldn't have cost him his life. Those police officers were tried, found guilty, and sent to prison. So Ryan had the wonderful idea of we should dig him up and kill that N again. No, not acceptable in our society. So he's already suspended for his PED use from the boxing ring, and he should be further ostracized for this situation for obvious reasons. Now, if he was drinking, if he was on drugs, and he clearly has a substance abuse problem, that's not an excuse. But what it does say is, I really need to go get help. And so I wish mercy on his heart, so to speak, to go get the help you need. I don't wish bad on him, but you can't just come out and say, oh, I'm sorry, and it goes away. There has to be a process by which you earn the second opportunity. I'm frankly sick and fucking tired of Ryan Garcia right now. The social media, somebody take the dude's phone away for 2 minutes because it's just ridiculous. The types of things he puts out there and the types of things he says are just off the charts. So, I'm about up to here with it. I'm done.
Yeah, well, with that, let's move on then. Virgil Ortiz to challenge Sergio Bohachuk for the WBC interim 154-pound title on August the 10th has been announced, Dan. How excited should we be for this fight?
This is a really good fight. Sergey Bohachuk is a guy that doesn't get a lot of hype, a lot of love necessarily, hasn't had a lot of fights on the highest level in terms of exposure. But he got an opportunity on March 30th when Sebastian Fundora and Tim Tszyu fought in that fight. Remember, Fundora had to move up the card to replace, there was injuries, and Tim Tszyu had he ended up having to switch opponents. He was the guy that was from the undercard coming up into the main event. But because of that, Bohachuk found his way onto the preliminary part of the card against Mendoza. And they put on a tremendous battle, and Bohachuk won this interim belt. And he's always been an exciting fighter. He's always been a guy that was knocking his opponents out. And so now you have a fight between Virgil Ortiz and him. Ortiz was supposed to fight Tim Tszyu on the Riyadh season card in LA on August 3rd. But obviously in the main event that night against Fundora back in March, he had that terrible, terrible laceration on his scalp that was just terrible, bled all over the place. I mean, is one of the more gruesome fights you'll ever see in your life. I see you making the face there, just brutal.
I don't like it.
So yeah, right. They thought he'd be able to be ready to fight, but it was like back in May that the doctor was like, no, you're not fighting. It's not healed enough. So he had to pull out. So that was off the show, and they were looking around for a new opponent for Virgil Ortiz to fight. So they proposed Bohachuk. For whatever the reasons were, the Saudis decided that wasn't the fight that they wanted to put on the card, which is certainly their prerogative. But Golden Boy, Virgil's promoter, and Tom Loeffler, who was promoter of Bohachuk, still wanted to make the match. Golden Boy has a whole slate of dates on DAZN. They were looking to put Virgil Ortiz in a big fight against a good opponent for maybe a title, a top name, at least a top a guy that was going to be competitive, or on paper anyway. And this just seemed like, okay, if they don't want to put it on the Riyadh Seasons card, that's fine. No problem there. We'll make it the main event of our card. And so it is a really good fight. I don't see how it can't be an action fight for however long it goes. Virgil is undefeated, has won every one of his fights by knockout. If I'm not mistaken, Bohachuk has won every one of his fights by knockout except the Mendoza fight. You got two guys that are aggressive. Neither guy is an old shot guy. They're both still in the prime parts of their career. Really good matchup. And the reality is the winner is going to have they're going to have an interim title, fair enough, but they're definitely going to put themselves in position where they're going to be considered among the top, 2, 3, 4 guys in the weight class at 154 pounds. Really good matchup. I'm excited about it. August 10th at the Mandalay Bay in Las Vegas, one of the great arenas in the world, in my opinion, for boxing. And it's, they used to do boxing matches there, Seb, all the time. When I first started, they've had a long history of doing tremendous battles. There are a lot of great fights have taken place at Mandalay Bay. They haven't had as much activity in recent years, but this is a fight worthy of that building.
Yeah, just to clarify, he's won 24 fights, 23 knockouts. The only one he didn't win by knockout was the Brian Mendoza fight at the end of March. So yeah, one defeat. Who did he lose against, Dan? Do you know?
Off the top of my head, I don't recall, but I think it was. You'd have to look it up. I forget.
Brandon Adams.
Yeah. That's right. Ring City USA card.
Right then. So looking at the schedule, then it's been a bit few and far between this schedule. We've been talking about this on and off. Why hasn't there been that many cards announced? So August, right? 3rd of August, we've got Crawford. 10th of August, we've got Virgil Ortiz fighting. 17th of August, what's to come? Have you got any inside information?
Well, I'm told that on the 10th of August or the 17th of August, depending on, I don't know if it's 100% settled yet, but supposedly PBC, which hasn't had a lot of activity this year other than, 3 pay-per-view cards, that they'll be with their new Amazon Prime Video deal, that the first non-pay-per-view event of that particular contract is supposed to take place. It hasn't been announced yet, but I am told it's supposed to be August 10th or August 17th. And the fighters involved in that supposedly are going to be in the main event, Caleb Plant, former super middleweight title holder, coming off, he's had some losses, but he had the good win. Obviously he's probably best known for the knockout against Canelo when they fought for undisputed. But anyway, so he had a really good fight against Benavidez, for example. But anyway, he's still a good fighter, and they're looking to bring him back. So supposedly he's going to be in the main event. They're looking to bring back Stephen Fulton, who's been off since he got stopped in a fight where he lost his unified titles at junior featherweight to Naoya Inoue when he was one of the few guys that had the balls to go to Japan and put his titles up and fight the guy. So I always respect Stephen Fulton for that. Supposedly he's going to be on the undercard. The opponent for him supposedly is Ronnie Rios. We'll see what happens with that. But one thing I found interesting, so if Caleb Plant's coming back on that card, that'll be interesting to see who they match him up with. But it was just this week that you had Oscar De La Hoya out there putting on his social media, hey, he was making the point about if Caleb Plant is at super middleweight, which he's been at for a while, and you got Jaime Munguia, who's coming off a fight loss against Canelo, but a good fight in a decision. He made the post, and he tagged both fighters. What would you guys think about Jaime Munguia against Caleb Plant? Now, that's obviously a bigger, not going to be that would not be probably a free Prime Video fight. But as a matchup, I'd be down for that. If you're looking for an opponent to bring Munguia back against, later in the year, and Caleb Plant, I'd be down for that. I mean, I can see a scenario, quite frankly, where, Munguia's, off for a little bit. Caleb comes back, maybe has that fight in August that we just mentioned as a possibility. And then him and Munguia go at it, sometime in the fall, like September, October, November. I mean, that seems like a pretty good plan to me. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but if you follow the breadcrumbs, so to speak, that seems like it wouldn't be an unreasonable scenario that could play out. Excellent. Right, Dan. We'll wrap that up there then, unless you've got anything else to add that we may have missed. I think we're pretty good. We're pretty good. Right. Well, thank you everybody for watching. We'll be back later in the week to preview the weekend's card, which is going to be Janibek versus Mikhailovic. And of course, Jaron Boots Ennis returns for his homecoming in Philadelphia, back with Matchroom, but not back with Matchroom, but with Matchroom for his first card. So Dan, thank you for joining me, and we'll see you again later in the week.